I've had a bit of a problem, or rather the bike has. So, I was out for a ride last weekend, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I lost my gears, or more specifically, the gear lever on the left-hand side of the bike just dropped away completely. Pulled over, stopped, had a look. Initially I thought something's fell off, a spring's broken, could be anything. I wasn't sure. I had a look, and I'll show you in a minute with a close-up. And this side of the bike, you've got your water pump and you've got your generator behind this lower case. So the problem I experienced with the gear lever, see how when you change up, it returns to a neutral, not to neutral gear, but to a neutral position. When you change down, it automatically returns. That is on a spring mechanism inside here, which controls this position. And what I found when I had the problem is that this gear lever dropped all the way down here and was just flapping around with no spring tension whatsoever. So inside the generator cover, controlling the gear selector mechanism, there are two springs. There's an upper spring and a lower spring. And the lower spring should not be in two parts. So this is the story. So I got back home. Luckily I was out, I was only about 8 kilometers, about 5 miles from home. So I managed to limp home very, very slowly indeed. I called my Ducati dealer, and what was really interesting was the young lady that looks after bookings and the servicing side. Once I explained what I'd experienced, she said, "Oh yes, small part, big problem," translated from German. And it turns out that this is a fairly common problem on all of the Multistradas, the Monsters and the Diavel and XDiavel. So that was a bit of a shock and a surprise. We talked about, at that point I didn't know what was wrong. She said, yes, it's normally two parts. I was expecting to speak to a technician in the workshop and find out technically what it could be, but reception already knew this is a common problem. So cut a long story short, they said it would be about 3 weeks before I could get the bike in, but I should take it on a trailer, not ride it, because it depends which one of these two springs breaks. If it's the upper spring, which I'll show you in a video in a moment, this can sometimes fall into the gear mechanism between the starter motor and the flywheel, and that can cause problems. If that gets into the gearbox, it's a really big problem, probably terminal for the bike. If it's the lower one and you have some luck, this part might fall to the bottom of the outer case, which is exactly what I found, and it hadn't got into the engine. But I'm going to show you a video with everything apart. So one of the hardest things it seems to be to find correct information for is the shift drum setting. Once you've replaced this spring here and the other spring here, which I've covered earlier on, and I've mounted this whole thing loosely, so these two bottom bolts are not done up tight, they're loose, allowing the bracket at the back, which you can see as this, to move backwards and forwards. So this next section is quite important, and you need to get this right. So what we're looking at is the fork arm. This is the V-shaped device you can see on the right-hand side. If we zoom in, this is the upper spring. This is the fork return spring. It's fairly easy to replace. It's straightforward. Just make sure you get it on the right way round. The second spring, which is the lower spring, which is the shift return spring, is much more critical. That's this part we've just zoomed in on. So in the next couple of slides, it's really important that you take your time replacing this spring, because the settings make an awful big difference to the gear shift once you've installed it. So let's just zoom in. So this is me measuring the gap between the left and the right of the lower fork spring return mechanism, and we need to measure this very, very accurately to the left and to the right. So I'm going to put up a diagram so that you can see a bit more detail about what I mean. So if this is a theoretical measurement, if we take a measurement on the left and it's 9.5 millimeters, and on the right it's 11.5 millimeters, this means the spring is unbalanced, and we need to make it balanced so that the measurements are the same. One more shot on the screen. This is the part we're going to measure, and we're going to measure the gap at the top and the bottom and make sure or adjust it so that they're equal. So going back to that screen that we just had, a little bit of maths. So we've got a measurement on the left, a measurement on the right. We add the two together, divide by 2, and that gives us, on this example, 10.5 millimeters. That is the correct setting for both the left and the right hand side. So look at the next screen. So in the end, this is what you're aiming for, a balanced measurement on the left and the right. The figure of 10.5 is only an example. You need to do your own measurements and your own maths to get this absolutely correct. Next screen are the two part numbers. This is what you need to order from Ducati. The upper spring is already an updated spring. The lower one has been the same part for years. So let's move on. So the shift drum, which is this here, this needs to be in neutral. You can fit this roughly and use the gear selector to get it into neutral to be 100% sure that you're in neutral. What you can do with the shift drum, if you just gently lift the shift arm out the way, see these little pins. If I'm quiet and you listen, you can hear it's on a spring retention and it springs back into neutral. Listen and watch. It does it from both sides. Oh, too far. Okay, so once it's in neutral, on the upper part of the shift arm up here, you can see there's a line. That line has to be absolutely dead center of that top pin. If it's to the left, the right, or the left, you're going to have problems finding neutral and shifting into gears correctly. Now currently the mechanism is loose and you've got 5 or 6 millimeters of adjustment, and it's hard to know where to set it, but the correct setting is that line there. I lift it up ever so slightly. Can you see the line? Right here. That needs to be dead central with this one. So the securing bolts, they've got Loctite 243 on them, so they're ready for tightening down and using the correct torque setting, but first we need to get this alignment. So just gently move it until you have a look. Can you see? That's central, that's to the right, central, that's to the left. And I want it absolutely smack in the center, which is there. And then what I'm going to do is just nip these two bolts up. One's 6mm, one's 5mm. Torque settings are in your manual. So that's roughly there. Then this arm is held fast and the shift arm is still free to move, but it's dead central with that top pin. That's really important. And now when I reset the gear shifter, you can go down one gear, all the way up, rotate the back wheel. You might have a little bit of a problem. You might find that you think it's not engaging gear properly, but that's because the engine's not running, the bike's not moving. This is completely normal. Don't panic at this stage. Providing you fitted your springs the right way around, both this top one here and the bottom one, and you set this alignment, this mark to this top pin, you're not going to have any problems. So I'll carry on reassembling. For the cleaning process, getting the gasket services ready. This is a reduction gear from your starter motor, which is going to drive your flywheel during the starting process. You can take this off, be careful, don't drop the washers and the spacers on the back, but you can take it off so that you can get in here and clean it out. When you're doing the cleaning process, you need to block all of these holes, all of them, and I mean all of them, and there's one behind the reduction gear, with some blue rag for the cleaning process so you don't get anything into the engine. Once you've finished the job, you're going to do a refill with oil or fresh filter. It's a really good idea to do 500 kilometers, 500 miles and do another oil and filter change. So I hope that helps. I'll show you the next stage. Okay, so I've just done a dry fit without the sealant on the case, ready for reassembly, and everything's fine. But there are just a couple of things I want to mention. We've obviously talked about making sure this alignment for the upper shift arm lines up here. See in the earlier video to tell you how to do that. But with regards to putting the flywheel back on, there's one thing that's really important that you've got to get right. There are two Woodruff or crankshaft locking cutouts at the end, but there's only one that's about 2 centimeters further in. On the other side underneath here, it's completely smooth. This cutout here absolutely has to align with this oil outlet at the top. It's really important. The flywheel will actually fit on in multiple places, as I found out, and And so you've got to be sure that this cutout here lines up with this oil outlet here. It's really important. If you look back on the earlier videos, you'll see that the crankshaft splines on opposite this, further in, it's about 1.5 millimeter shallower than the rest of the teeth, and this allows oil that's been injected by the pump to come across the back of the crankshaft, do the flywheel and crank bearings, but also there's on the inside of this, there's a tiny hole which then feeds out here and lubricates and keeps the stator lubricated and oiled and cool. So it's really important that you make sure that this is aligned to this. It's fairly self-explanatory, but just in case you're doing it. So is there anything else that I would have done differently? There's one thing I probably would have bought in advance. I'll just show you this. This is the case, and on the inside here is the oil seal. And actually, if I put my fingers underneath, it's pretty hard and non-flexible. In hindsight, I would have ordered one of those and pressed it out and pressed a new one in and done that at the same time. But I'm running out of time and I can't go back to the dealers and get another one of those. They'll probably have to order it anyway. The surfaces, you need to make sure these are absolutely spotlessly clean. You're going to have to clean out your cases and obviously clean out inside the main case. On the outer case, on the 1098s, the Panigale 1098s, the stator connector actually has a white connector in here, so you can disconnect it and take this to the bench and clean it. It's a much better idea, however, that's a cause of connection problems. So this one is wired directly into the loom, which goes off up into the bike, and so I didn't really want to take it off, so I've ended up balancing it and keeping it on here. It's a little more tricky, a little bit more work. You have to be a bit more careful. You don't want to put any of those cables under stress or strain, very important. So you might want to think, do you want to disconnect this further up at the battery, or do you want to leave it on and do it something like this? And the last thing is some of the things I've used. As always, Ducati charge an absolute fortune for products that have been rebranded. So the things I've used, Loctite 243, that's used for the shifter mechanism, the 2 bolts on the bottom, and I'm going to use that on the case bolts. And Loctite 270, that goes on the flywheel threads. You don't want a lot, you want it right at the back because you only want to lock the end part of the thread. That's the stuff I use. This is what I'm going to use for the gasket sealant. There are 2 options. 3-bond make it for Ducati. This is a Ducati one. Ducati rebrand it and charge you 50 euros, I think, for a tube of this. You can get this online for about 25. This is TB 1215, made by 3-bond. There's another version which is TB 1184. 1184 would possibly be a slightly better bet, but this is the one I could get pretty quickly. You're going to need a case pressing tool to get the case off nice and smoothly, and of course this is the offending 2 parts that have caused me all the problem, which is the mainspring. Obviously, as you'll see from the pictures in the video earlier, I've decided to replace both. So put it all back together and let's see what she's like. So to recap, if you have a problem and your gear lever suddenly goes loose and dangles down, or it gets floppy going up because it can go either way, it's going to be possibly one of these 2 springs. And depending on which spring and where the parts fall, you could have big problems or little problems. I'm told that the top spring, if that breaks, it can fall into the gap between the starter motor gear and the flywheel gears and cause problems. It can also be thrown up inside the casing and get through into the gearbox. If that happens, that can be catastrophic, and that's the end of your engine unless you're going to have it rebuilt. So if the top one goes, it can be pretty major. The bottom one also depends on where these 2 parts, this part will remain on the shaft, which I'll show you, which is what you can see on the outer casing inside. But this part, if it falls and sits in the casing, and I was really lucky, I found it just sitting here, you're going to be in luck, and it's just a couple of springs and a couple of days of work, or 6 or 7 hours. I've done the work, I've finished the job. The gear change now is much better. So there's been a positive to this. I can now find neutral coming down through the box, third, second, and it drops into neutral absolutely beautifully, and the same coming up from first. So finding neutral, now it's set up correctly, is much better. In terms of cost, if this happens to you, you're looking at around about 650, 700 pounds, euros, dollars for labour, and then parts. So I hope you've gained something from this experience and that you found it at least very interesting. So I find myself asking the question, how do I feel about this? Well, I was shocked, obviously. I was disappointed when it happened, but I'm also very grateful that I had a bit of luck with the different parts of the spring falling into the case. And it turns out it wasn't a very expensive job for me to do. Technically, it was fairly straightforward. Cooling system, oil filter, some gasket sealant, a bit of patience, a couple of special tools, but really not an overly technical or long job. I did it over 2 or 3 days. I had to go and get some different coolant. So how do I feel? Has that tainted my experience of Multistrada ownership? And I don't think it has. I was surprised. I wasn't aware that this was a fairly common problem, and I was a bit shocked that when I phoned Ducati that their service team knew all about this as a common problem that affected 3 model ranges. So that was a bit of a surprise. Am I going to change my bike? No, she's lovely. I think I'm just going to have to take this on the chin and move forward. There's been a plus, which I mentioned earlier on, is the gear change now is so much better. If you watch the video in the middle, which is me setting up the linkage and the adjustment's really crucial. So you if you're going to do this yourself, pay real attention to that setup. That has made the selection or the finding of neutral and the selection of gears so much different. I used to get an occasional false neutral changing up, normally between 5th and 6th. That's vanished. I don't have any more false neutrals. So there's a positive side to the story. So I don't think it's affected my choice to keep the bike, but it has affected the order in which I do the series of videos. So I was going to do much later on a series or a video all about the problems. So I think what I'm going to do next is tackle the problems I've experienced and then change the order of things. So I hope that's okay, and I'll speak to you soon.